I'm Alex Howard.
And I'm Amanda Silver. And this is Dirty Laundry.
I think we can easily say that you and I have peaked in our careers.
We really have.
I could die tomorrow happily.
Yeah.
After what we just did. Tell people what we did.
We have interviewed the queen of conflict resolution. Oof. The queen. Someone who we have idolized, who we have studied about, learned from, is coming on our show today. And her name is Dr. Landau.
Yep.
And she has written the book on mediation
literally
and conflict resolution. She has reformed the Family Law Act. She has brought domestic violence awareness into the courts. She is a lawyer. She is a psychologist. She is a Middle East peace expert. She's everything. She's just everything in one.
In a brilliant tiny package.
Brilliant change maker. She really is. And so we talk about people making change and doing things, but this is someone who actually has done it. So I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Landau to Dirty Laundry. Welcome, Dr. Landau. It is an honor for us to be here and for you to come on our show. We've really admired your work for many years. You wrote the textbook on mediation as well as many other accomplishments. And so we're so honored to be here. So thank you.
The honor is mine. And what I absolutely love is to see two mediators in front of me who are absolutely the gift of the result of efforts. So over the years. Yeah. Wonderful.
So sweet.
Well, we've learned from the best.
Yeah, exactly. Literally from the textbook that you wrote.
Yes,
so
yes. What I brought with me today. Yes.
So why don't we start at the beginning? I mean, how did you fall into this? You went to law school, but then twice. Okay.
2 law schools.
Rewind for us.
Well, it's a long rewind. I have to say that thinking about the pathway that I took, and I know that today is really about separation pathways, and it's the focus on helping people with a better outcome for their difficult life transition. But I actually have 2 pathways.
Okay.
So if I can share that.
Please.
The first pathway is family law, and it is the impact on separating families and particularly the impact on children. The second pathway is human rights and concern about vulnerable minorities, people where there are tensions between faith groups, and the common core, thinking about it, what I love is having a question that lets me think about a pathway, is wanting to resolve conflicts peacefully. So that's the core, and the content changes. So if I think first about the separating families pathway, it was only recently that I realized that because my mother was a child of divorce, and the impact on her was so traumatic, that became something that I really was concerned about. So she was in a family where her mother was a Russian immigrant refugee. The marriage ended, and my grandmother was left during the Depression with 4 children and no support, and had to survive being a seamstress. And my mother lost a father that she loved at the age of 8 and never saw him again. And so that was really traumatic and impactful. And what I just want to say is that I became curious about what happened. And, I saw how anxious my mother was about her marriage and financial security and all of that. So after first year university, I decided to go and find my grandfather.
Wow.
And I wanted to hear his story.
Oh, my goodness.
So which is really the way of mediation, is wanting to hear both stories.
Curiosity.
Curiosity. And it turned out that he was living in the States, and he was a lovely man with a wonderful personality, remarried, who said that, he loved my grandmother. He had an affair. He apologized for the trauma it had caused. He had sent support checks and gifts and pleas for reconciliation. But my grandmother's sister decided on her behalf to reject everything,
No.
but didn't supply any financial assistance.
Oh.
So
Oh
what
my
I saw was the
goodness.
impact that extended family can have
Wow.
when they want to be the ally of the person who's been
Yeah.
hurt,
Yeah.
and they jump in, but in a way that's really quite harmful. So that was that path. And then if you're interested, I can mention
This
the
is,
other
and
we
this
want to
is
hear all of it.
amazing.
We want to hear all of it.
How much time have you got? Because we're here.
We're here. We're not going anywhere.
So the other pathway was that not only my Russian immigrant refugee grandmother, but my other grandmother was a refugee from Poland. And of course, my family was very much impacted by the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And so what I took out of it was a concern about vulnerable refugees and immigrants. And so when I was 11 years old, this is when I began my career on human rights. And
Incredible.
in my school, you had to do some kind of community project. Some kids helped, an elderly person carry groceries across the street. I decided to volunteer to be a counselor during my March break at St. Christopher's House with immigrant and refugee children.
At 11.
At 11.
Okay, just clarify.
And I do remember one of my campers turning and looking at me with his hands on his hips saying, "You're not a counselor, you're just a girl." Well, anyway, I thought I was doing something good. And I returned in university and worked with groups and then became the girls' head counselor at the summer camp. And they were all immigrant and refugee families. So I was girls' head counselor during the day. And at night I worked for the Canadian Civil Liberties, being sent out on human rights cases for issues of all minority groups. Anyway, that set my two paths.
I feel like it's you sort of start small and then it expands. It's like we deal with one family at a time and help and impact and in a positive way. So that's the sort of mediation with working with the families. And then on a grand scale, which do you find to be, I mean, maybe this is a silly question, but more impactful? Like does each individual person and taking the time to ensure that the trauma of separation and divorce doesn't impact, and continue that cycle? Or are we better off going big and saying this entire, world really needs an intervention and support and how to navigate? You've seen it from both sides,
the micro
really.
and the macro.
Yeah.
Well, I need to fill in a little bit because I'm going to say both and.
Yeah.
I'm not, certainly individual families stick with me and I want us to get to the separating families.
Definitely.
But the trauma of the Middle East the impact of interfaith conflict is really big for me. As a result of a tragedy that happened to someone that was close to our family, I participated in 3 compassionate listening missions in the Middle East, going to Israel, the West Bank, and the first time to Gaza.
Yeah.
And the thing that was really impactful and that I took with me for separating families is listening to empathize, listening to understand, rather than listening to dispute or to disagree. Yeah. And what I found as I met with many families of very different backgrounds and very different political views, is that when people feel really listened to, they shift.
Yes.
They start to become curious about other people's perspective. They let down
those walls.
Their walls, and they start to become open. And we had some amazing examples of people who shifted in ways you never would have expected.
I talk about the macro level of conflict resolution.
Yes. How much one informs the other as well.
Your work, on a broad global scale really impacts individual families because conflict is conflict, right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, whether it's a married couple or, 2 sides of a war, I mean, people need to be heard and listened to.
And they want to be seen, right? It's the human condition, just to be seen and to be heard. And it's so powerful when we can just listen without judgment. And it is not easy, to be fair.
It's not
I am
easy.
trained in this. And in my own marriage, I'm constantly fighting.
Listen,
and
I think you really nailed it on the head because you said, listening not to prepare a dispute or a
Right.
counter, right?
Right.
Because so often I see that with disputing, sides of a family
Right.
where they hear you, but they're just ready to counter with their perspective.
Right.
But listening to understand and to validate is a very difficult skill. It's a real skill.
And we always hear the line, hurt people. But I think the rest of that is, and healed people heal people. So how do we heal the hurt, right? How do we shift that narrative? And I mean, you're doing it.
You're doing it. Tell us
Right.
more about your work and
Yeah. So maybe I'll go to the family law trajectory, which was a very big part of my life. It's not always about war.
Right.
Okay.
So it does feel like that these days, to be
yeah.
honest.
So my first degree was in psychology, PhD in psychology. It's actually because initially I wanted to go to law school. And at the end of high school, the principal at my high school thought I was going to be a lawyer and asked me to introduce the dean of the law school to the student body. Wow. And when I sat down with him and said, "Oh, I'm very excited because very soon I'm going to be applying to law school," his answer was, "Why would you do that? You know you'd be the only woman there." And I said, "Well, that sounds like a lot of fun."
Yeah.
And he said, "But of course, if we took you, nobody would hire you at the end." He said, except maybe to make coffee in the back room. So I decided to become a psychologist and got much the same response, actually, when I applied to graduate school. But I persisted and managed to finish my PhD. But I spent about 10 years, the first 10 years, working in mental health. And my favorite job was as the chief psychologist at the family court clinic. So that was the way that I blended my interest in law and my interest in psychology. And what I observed so dismayed me because what I was watching was couples writing horrible affidavits about each other, lining their family members and their friends up in opposition. And I kept thinking, these people are going to walk out of the courtroom and they're going to have to be parents for the next 40 years.
Exactly.
And how are they, now that they've been publicly humiliated, how are they going to work together? And so I decided I would change the system. I have to tell you that there's a common thread in my life.
I love it.
Yeah, it's change the system. Look at it, see what's wrong, and do something different. So I created what I called problem-solving conferences, because the word mediation, I hadn't heard it. I hadn't heard it anywhere. So what I did, I brought in both parties into my office, and I asked them, what are the issues in dispute? What can you agree on? And we worked out an agreement. I wrote up what they agreed to, sent it to the judge, and that was the end of the case.
Wow.
Well, I have to tell you that the lawyers were not happy.
No, I bet.
No, they thought that what I was doing was absolutely showing how little I understood about the law, because you cannot bring people in a conflict of interest together in the same room. It's absolutely the wrong way to do things, and it's dangerous and all sorts of other good things. And we were dealing with child protection, juvenile delinquency, and marriage breakdown. And I found that I could deal with all of them the same way. And so, for example, if the Children's Aid Society had a concern about a case, I brought the Children's Aid Society worker in with them. And if it was juvenile delinquency, I brought the teacher or the truant officer at that time.
The truant officer.
And
I remember that. Yeah.
Right.
My mom used to threaten that all the time.
And it was the same thing. What are the issues of concern? What do we need to do in order to address those issues? What can you agree on? How can we follow up and monitor to make sure those plans are actually working?
Right.
So those were the problem-solving conferences. Anyway, the lawyers were so concerned that what I was doing was inappropriate, that because I didn't understand the law, that I decided maybe now I'll go to law school.
That's incredible.
Actually, while I was at the Family Court Clinic, I was appointed to the first Status of Women Council, the Ontario Council on Status of Women, and my specialty was family law reform and criminal reform. And while I was there, we made significant gains in family law reform. That was the Family Law Reform Act, and for the first time getting a division of property that was fairer to women. It wasn't all the way there yet, but we made significant gains.
Yeah.
So while I was in law school, actually at that time, here I was I was still at the family court clinic and working on these things. And my husband said to me, you know, that not all the women are making coffee. You know, I think women are now much more prevalent in law.
Yeah.
You always wanted to go. Why don't you go to law school now?
Wow.
And so we had one more year to pay off our mortgage, paid off the mortgage, and I went to law school.
A great, beautiful, supportive partner.
It was wonderful.
Really
it was
incredible.
Absolutely
Really supported
wonderful.
your
And
dreams.
I did the same for him. I said, you always wanted an MBA. Your turn, you go for an MBA.
I love
beautiful.
that.
So we took turns taking care of, While I was in law school, I would spend my evenings working with a small group of mental health professionals and lawyers creating the Ontario Association for Family Mediation.
Wow. It's incredible.
Which we are now
We're
part
so,
of.
This is just,
No
gives
big
us
deal.
the chills. We're so excited.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was one of their
Incredible.
first presidents and created the standards for training and ethical conduct and discipline. And the big thing that I got involved in is that as mediation was taking over, taking off, and I, right out of the gate, I started teaching family mediation as soon as I finished my law school degree.
Okay.
The thing that really was a major roadblock was that women's advocates, women's domestic violence advocates were very concerned about what we were doing from a different perspective.
Right.
They were saying, you're bringing abusers and victims together in the same room and you're not paying enough attention and this is really dangerous for women. And I decided that I needed to listen to them. So I got a grant and I brought the leading mediators and women's advocates from across North America together for the Toronto Forum on Women Abuse. And I said, I promise you, we are not going to sell you mediation.
Right.
We are here to listen to your concerns and to figure out how we can do things better. They love being listened to because when people are listened to, they then are open to listening. They asked us to do some demonstrations and that they would, and the way that I set it up was you'll coach us on how we can do things better. And so the result was that together we wrote the domestic violence policy.
Incredible.
And it was passed by OAFM unanimously. And it became the standard practice across North America. And and that every organization agreed that every conference would have domestic violence in it. Everybody would have mandatory training, mandatory screening. And then when I became involved in rescuing family arbitration, we did the same thing, that you had to you had to screen for domestic violence.
just drops these nuggets.
I did this,
just reformed that whole system.
And you really have.
Question though.
Yeah.
So when you went to law school, did that change the way you viewed or practiced mediation? Like, were the lawyers correct in saying, oh, you don't understand family law? Or was it just like, nope, I was bang on in the first place, but now I have a law degree to back it up?
Well, what I really appreciated was understanding the issues of fairness and justice and having the knowledge of what was a reasonable outcome.
Right.
And I really appreciated putting that together with the impact of women's advocates. I'm always open to improving the process.
I see that. It's definitely a common thread here.
I'm not
with
so
your
good
life.
at throwing things out. I'm much better at integrating. And so I really benefited. And when I finished law school, the thing that was really interesting to me was that as mediation started to catch on, lawyers started to say, well, we're kind of interested in this. And by the time they would finish the course, they would call themselves recovering attorneys.
Oh, funny.
I've done a lot of training with family lawyers.
Yeah. So I think what they would recognize, the light bulb that would go on, I'm thinking of two particular light bulbs. One light bulb was the harm they had done to children, that they were very proud of winning,
Right.
but at what cost?
What cost?
And so what they had a chance to reflect on was how they might have had a better outcome. It would have been a successful outcome. Lawyers like success, but the success might have included the children. Because I think in law school, one of the things that I learned was that the client is the person who pays you. And I never thought of it that way. I thought as a family law lawyer, my client is the entire family.
Family.
I always say
And maybe the ripples from that, maybe the extended family and the friends and the new partners and the community that is impacted by every family that goes through separation. So that, so I saw that, that made a big change.
Wow. I love how you differentiate between alternative dispute resolution and family dispute resolution. How it should be called family dispute resolution because it shouldn't be the alternative, right? It should be the mainstream, right?
Yeah.
I mean, litigation is there for a reason and sometimes necessary, but the impact on families when you take them through that process.
Well, the thing that's really interesting is that the law has evolved to make families much more important and the impact on children much more important. So as the law has evolved, the practice has to evolve.
Yeah.
And people now take into account the broader impact. And I think that, rather than seeing that the end of the day is when you walk out of court, the end of the day is 40 years later when, in my experience, children that had been through an adversarial divorce often chose not to marry. They chose not to have children. And they told me right up that this was because of the experience that they'd had.
For me, I'm a child of divorce, and I was so excited to get married and have kids and do it differently. So I think you can kind of go either way, right? It's like, no, that is absolutely not a road I want to go down. There's way too much scar tissue there, not interested. Or in my particular case, I'm like, I'm just going to do it way better.
Well, I like your way.
Yeah,
of doing
I like
it.
your way.
But,
Thanks.
but
Me too.
I did have other children that that not only were fearful of getting married, but I also had couples where at the first sign of conflict, they would decide,
It's over.
I'm on the same path as my parents. I might as well get out of it right now.
Right.
And they would decide preemptively to end relationships that really didn't need to be ended because they hadn't really learned how to address conflict in the way that you've got the confidence.
Yeah.
And do you think that is why so many marriages don't succeed? Is because at the first sign or maybe, first time there's an issue, people are so quick to sort of take the exit.
Yeah. I think that certainly is true of a number of people, that they haven't really witnessed people accommodating each other, listening to each other, saying, you know what, our personalities are different. They were different earlier on. They're different now. The thing that's really fun is that people often marry what they're missing. So an introvert will marry an extrovert because they're not feeling so comfortable socially, and that person gives them a wonderful social entree. But that person expects them to socialize.
Right, and to live with the extrovert and live an extrovert life. Right, or vice versa.
Vice versa.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or somebody that is kind of a go with the flow, not very organized, and they marry somebody who's wonderfully structured and organized and critical. Oh, I'm so glad I can depend on you. And that person becomes really boring. Oh my God, they put me in a box and I have to do things that way. But rather than standing back and saying, I married what I'm missing, and maybe there's some real benefits to that, but maybe also we need to find a way. And people do that as they get older. They tend to move from more extremes into more of a mushy center.
Yeah, it's funny. We're drawn to the opposite. They always say the yin and the yang, and then when push comes to shove, it's like, oh no, I actually want a carbon copy of myself, but you don't. You'd be miserable with that version.
So what's the solution?
So what is the solution? I think it's that curiosity, it's that openness, and it's seeing attributes or characteristics without judgment.
Yes.
So yes, maybe you're boring because you want to stay in on a Saturday night as an introvert.
Right.
Well, okay, I've been out the last 4 nights as an extrovert. I could use a night in. Or you know what? I've been in for 4 nights reading my book on the couch. I got to push myself out there. And so appreciating and taking each other not for granted and not finding the animosity maybe in the difference, but rather embracing it.
Well, my husband was an introvert, and as you can tell, I'm not an introvert. Yeah, it's sort of a mild carbon copy of my mother, who was even more extroverted. But anyway, my husband hated going to parties, cocktail parties with people that he didn't know, and large parties. They were noisy. There were too many, whatever. So what we worked out was that we would go in separate cars. I would go first, and he would come in maybe half an hour later, and I would, get to meet and greet and talk to people and find people that he knew. And then he could go and sit with the people that he knew in the corner, wherever, and enjoy a nice conversation with a small number of people. And then he would leave and I would stay on in the party. And that was our agreement about parties that he felt really not at ease.
I'm absolutely stealing
You're
this.
taking notes.
I'm stealing this idea. That's
So you sort of warm it up for them, make sure it's safe to come now, right? You can come and set it up for you. It's comfortable.
I found some people you'd really like. And I mean, he was very warm and very friendly in small groups. And so rather than insisting that he be comfortable in an environment that I was comfortable in, actually adjusting to the personality of the person you got.
That's so sweet.
That's something that I try as well to encourage my clients to see, even as they separate, that opposites, just because they're doing it a different way, for example, parenting, doesn't mean it's wrong. And in fact, the children are better off having two different styles. Then they could kind of find their own way and have different influences and design their own personality, because they get to see that there's multiple ways of doing it.
Well, also the children are likely to be a product of both of them and likely to be a mix. And of course, parents want to encourage the children to be just like them, and they're not.
No, they're definitely not.
It's really to take a look at the kids that you've got. Anyway.
So you have taken all of your years of experience in law, psychology, mediation, and you've created separation pathways.
Right.
And so we want to hear all about that because, it's really, we find even with our own clients, it's difficult to find services when you are going through a divorce. You meet some people immediately think, oh, I need to hire a lawyer and go straight to court. No, don't do that. There's other alternatives. There's other options for you. So you have a one-stop shop, really, where someone can come and get everything from start to finish done.
That's the thing that's so wonderful. And Separation Pathways was really born as a result of my experience at the Family Court Clinic. Okay, that was a free service then. And the government closed it down and did not replace it with legal aid for separating families, particularly people who want to do things in a cooperative way out of court. And so the kind of opportunity was that I observed, and certainly could read the literature, that up to 85% of people in family court they're unrepresented. They're unrepresented because they can't afford professional services. And also a number of them are there unrepresented because they really didn't want an adversarial battle. They thought if they just went into court, they could say their story they could tell their story to the judge. The judge would be sympathetic and it would all be wrapped up by 5 o'clock. And then they found that, it would take years. And so unaffordable, too time consuming. People couldn't get on with their life. They don't know what school the kids are going to go in.
Everything is halted.
You're in purgatory.
Really,
Their life is put on hold. It's unrealistic. None of us could handle that. And also, they were put in a position of being adversaries, having to write horrible things about each other and be humiliated. So anyway, what I decided was I really wanted to recreate a very affordable, friendly, timely resource for people. COVID meant that we were going to be having to shift from in-person to online, and it turned out to be wonderful.
It was a huge silver lining.
Huge. It has been wonderful.
Yeah, particularly for people who are in small communities or rural communities, or they have young children and they need babysitters and everything. They can do this in a much more affordable way. And what we wanted was to find professionals who really cared about all the people who were being left behind and would work at reduced rates. And in return for them working on reduced rates, what we did was we provided them with a model that really the family doctors might want to pick up on. And that is that we provide a lot of their administrative work. We set up the meetings, we collect the fees, we pay the professionals.
Yeah.
We take all of that out of their life.
The business end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we give them lots of clients. And the other thing that we found when I did a series of meetings with families who had gone through divorce and with mental health professionals and lawmakers, and asked them, what do we need to do differently? And the thing that the families said is, we're so thrown when a separation happens. We don't know what to do.
Yeah.
We feel like we're just totally lost.
Yeah.
And what we need is a roadmap.
Yes.
We need a path.
Yeah. Oh.
So we decided to
Okay.
create separation pathways. And so what we've provided is a 4-step, really clear process it's totally, the finances are totally upfront. People know that we've figured out what amount of time it would likely take to solve different issues. We give them a choice. They don't have to deal with all of their issues at once.
Amazing.
They can choose all of the issues, or they can choose just,
Immediate
we want a
ones.
parenting plan. We
Yeah.
want to see how that works. Then they always come back.
Right.
Or we don't have children or they're older
Right.
and we just want to deal with finances.
Yeah.
We give them choice. We tell them how long it's going to take. We tell them how much it's going to cost, all up front.
Incredible.
And we have consistency throughout, kind of a way of guiding people through holding their hand, navigating.
Yes.
We provide basically a navigation system through it. And the other thing that's really special about us is that we wanted to be sure that the agreements that are reached are fair, that are reasonable, that are based on the appropriate sharing of information, and that people end up with a legally binding separation agreement at the end. When they go to the mediation services in court, which are very helpful and affordable process, they end up with a memorandum of understanding that isn't yet a legally binding agreement. So then they have to find 2 separate lawyers, get somebody to draft the agreement, witness it and all that. So we provide the whole thing.
Incredible.
And what I love about Separation Pathways is that the professionals who work with us end up trusting each other's work. And so there's not the feeling of, oh, I can't trust this person. Who is it that's worked on this case? They know not only that these are trustworthy people, because we only use people that have been fully trained, but also in order to make it easier for people to work at a lower rate, I provided them with all my templates. So so people don't have to invent a memorandum of understanding about what's a parenting plan or what's a financial
it's all there.
thing. And the same thing for the lawyers, the template for separation agreement, so that we cut back on the number of hours that are basically wasted cost.
And are billed to the clients,
Exactly.
usually it's billed to the clients
Billed
because
to the clients.
and your rates are really, really affordable. I mean, they're pretty unlike anything I've seen. I mean, your packages are pretty incredible that you're offering. This full service, right?
It's
where you don't
full
leave
service.
people hanging with, okay, here is your, as mediators, here is our memorandum of understanding. Now go get your independent legal advice. You have a one-stop shop. They're getting their legal advice. It's all done through you.
And the idea is that people need an opportunity to feel confident that what they've negotiated, because they are going to get 2 independent lawyers at the end that will look it over and say, are you sure you understand it? Was there any pressure to agree to things that you don't feel comfortable about? Okay, then they're signed, witnessed, and out the door, and they can have an uncontested divorce at a minimum cost.
That's amazing.
And what I love about it is what's coming.
Yes.
As someone who went through divorce myself before I was in this field, I didn't know what was coming next. And that living in that uncertainty was very difficult. So I never knew what was the next step, what I could expect tomorrow. But with this, you know exactly what the steps are. And you can prepare yourself mentally and emotionally and all of the other ways. So I think
the
that's
real
really
win is
wonderful.
that you know the cost. Because in a time of such uncertainty and financial instability, this is one thing you don't actually have to guess at or worry about.
Which is a huge worry for people who don't have
Huge.
access to maybe the finances yet because they haven't settled things.
Right.
Well,
right? They're a stay-at-home parent who doesn't have the same access to income, to money. And so it really is accessible for people.
So this is the whole snowball of COVID and housing costs and concerns about immigration and concerns about getting jobs and all of that kind of stuff. People have a lot on their plate, and I want people to spend their money on their kids,
Right?
and on providing a better future and a new chapter to their life. I want it to be something that initially feels overwhelming, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And I don't want them to spend all their money on conflict. That conflict is going to have long-term consequences that nobody's going to like.
It's such a tricky thing because there is such a conflict of interest for the people for the lawyers that are representing, because the longer they're in conflict, the more money the lawyer's making. And I'm not poo-pooing on the lawyers. They're, they play an incredibly important role. But that's always bothered me.
The adversarial process, the conflict of interest in the adversarial process.
And I've seen
the more adversarial, the more costs, and around it goes.
As a mediator, as you've said, as Amanda has said, we leave them with this MOU, go find your legal advice. We've agreed. They've agreed. And then the lawyers, I've seen case after case just blow it up.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to avoid. I've always in my practice insisted that 100% of my clients have to have independent legal advice.
Okay.
And the way that I did it when my company was Cooperative Solutions, before it was Separation Pathways, for decades it was Cooperative Solutions, and I loved the name. But I required, and I told clients this up front, you need independent legal advice. I don't want anybody to come back later and say, this agreement turned out not to be fair, or somebody was able to go to court and overturn it or whatever. But what I wanted was to have the lawyers confident that what I was doing was credible.
Yeah.
So what I would do, though, is I would have people reach a memorandum of understanding. I would then withhold the memorandum of understanding. I wouldn't let them walk out the door. This was the way that I did it. And I would tell them that I have to find each a lawyer, and I would send the memorandum of understanding out to the lawyers and have them review it. And if there were any questions, we would all meet. Only on things where there was a legal question that was not properly dealt with or understood. Didn't happen very often. And that way I had the confidence. But the problem with doing it in private practice was everybody had different lawyers and they didn't know me and all of that. Now we do it with a body of people who come to know each other, know each other's work. And so the advantage to lawyers and the advantage to mediators is we can send them a lot of clients. They will go through more clients quickly rather than one client that may take 5 years to get through. Our clients will take a few months. And the few months is spent gathering the necessary information. What's the value of your home if you have a home? Have you had a chance?
Pensions.
Have you looked for a job? Let's see whether you're able to be employed before we finalize things. Find out whether your kids are actually going to go to university. They usually have to spend a couple of months evaluating their circumstances, getting the proper financial disclosure. But we can send people a lot of cases. You could, as a lawyer, deal with 3 cases in a day rather than 3 cases in a year. So
then you're not needing to drag it on.
You're not
potentially.
And people walk out the door happy. And right now I understand that only 2% of law students choose family law. 2%. But if you think of the number of families that separate, we're talking more like 70% because the statistics only look at divorces. They don't look at common law. And common law relationships end more quickly than divorces. So if we put the two together, to have 2% of the legal profession choosing family law, I want to make family law something people can feel good about. And, we know that the judges tried to avoid as much as possible hearing family disputes because it was so uncomfortable.
And you've put a lot of work into reforming the family court system.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? What needs to change?
Yeah,
And-
we
and
love
hearing
love to
about
know.
what are the things that need to change, today?
Well, I think one of the things that needs to change is that for people who want to resolve things in a friendly way, they need government support.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we need legal aid to provide support. And right now, they provide a minimum of support to people who want to litigate. They provide nothing to people who want to use a cooperative approach, which makes no sense to me at all.
Yeah.
Just fills the courts up. And the amount of support they get really just gets them in the door, maybe draft a few documents. It doesn't really get them anywhere. So that has to change. I think the government should just reverse their support and to make it an incentive for people who want to resolve things in a friendly way. And I think that the other thing that they need to do is the issue of common law spouses not being able to share the value of property. Now, in
So
British
interesting.
Columbia, if you live together for, I think, a year, I think it's 1 year or 2 years. I think it's maybe.
I thought it was one, but I don't.
I think
wanna-
it's one. I think it's 1 year. That just feels a little too short.
It- yeah.
Unless you have
That's
a child together.
A
Which,
child
yeah.
is yes.
Yeah. Then, because what that does is it leaves families that have lived together maybe for 10 years and had 4 children with the person who may be less employed in a very financially strained situation. And it was kind of based on a kind of a religious thing of, they chose not to get married, so they have to live with the consequences. People,
it should be
today,
the same.
Separation of church and state.
Just like child support is the same whether you're married or not.
Yeah.
So too should the division of property.
Yeah. So I think that, and one of the things that I'm hoping for separation pathways is that, first of all, we've just become a charity.
Tell us more about that.
Just over the new year, we became a charity, which was hard work and great. And what we want to do is we know that a number of clients that we've got now are able to afford our very affordable fees. But some people just can't afford anything.
Right. Yeah.
Or they can afford less.
Right.
So what we're hoping to do is to raise funds to support families that otherwise can't afford it. Maybe somebody will purchase a parenting plan for somebody. We're looking at different ways that we can do that.
Yeah, that's so great. Give a parenting plan this holiday season.
Forget about a registry.
Right?
Or,
Yes. Oh my God, on your marriage registry, there's already your parenting plan.
Well, support
or someone gets divorced. Here you go. Here's
support
your
a family to get independent legal advice.
That's beautiful.
Whatever. So that we're certainly working on that. And we're also working on new family mediators, often come out of all backgrounds, lawyers, mental health professionals, whatever, often health professionals. And they don't really have an opportunity to get supervision.
Yes.
Big pain in our side as well, we've noticed.
So we're providing free supervision right now to a number of people that get some of their hours and with offering supervision and offering co-mediation, and we don't charge for it.
That is incredible.
Because they are getting the benefit. But we don't have enough people or enough funding for that. So again, with our the money that we're hoping to gather, that we're going to create a program that offers more opportunities for people to learn and replicate what we're doing. And then we want to go across Canada.
I love
This
it.
is incredible. Wow. This has been
so the world is
incredible.
Lucky that you are doing this work because it is so needed. And you are just a pioneer and a trailblazer and badass. Can I just say it?
Yeah, you are.
You are incredible, Barb. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of the work that you are doing to bring peace to our families and around the world.
And thank you because you show that you totally understand and you are totally on board. That's the best gift that I've got. That's the last thing that I'm going to say is that one of the families that I helped in a way that the child came up with a wonderful solution to their parents' conflict. But what I really valued was 10 years later, that child was in my mediation course, choosing to become a mediator because of the difference, the impact on her family.
Yeah.
And that's the gift. The gift is people like you that pick up the torch and are running with it.
Well,
That's
you.
our plan. That's our
We have
goal.
big shoes to fill.
Big
too.
shoes. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Barb.
Thank you.
This episode was written and created by Alex Howard and Amanda Silver. Produced, edited, and engineered by RTF Productions. Make sure to rate and review our show if you loved it, and give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you stream your podcast to stay up to date on all upcoming episodes. Thanks for listening, and go easy on us. We're not your ex.